I knew something was off the day the CEO's wife showed up barefoot in our office, mascara running like she'd just been baptized in vodka and spite. She was wearing a silk robe over what I assume was lingerie, and clutching a Louis Vuitton bag like it contained state secrets, or a Glock. She stormed past reception like she owned the place, which technically she almost did, and made a beeline straight for my cubicle. 9B, the one by the flickering light maintenance never fixed because, we'll get to it eventually. That bulb's been dying slower than this company's ethics. I just finished sorting out yet another $250,000 clerical error in the vendor ledger when she slapped both hands on my desk and snarled, "Fire her or I'll ruin your life." No context. No greeting. Just full-blown rage theater in front of the office plants and a very confused male intern. That's how invisible I used to be. 13 years of silence, and the first time someone addresses me like I matter, it's because their marriage is combusting and I'm the nearest piece of furniture. Let me rewind for a second. My name's Reese Hall. I've worked at Stratwell and Gray since Obama's first term, and I'm still technically listed as Operations Specialist too, because nobody ever bothered to update the title. I've had 5 managers, 3 restructures, 2 office moves, and 0 promotions. Once, HR spelled my name as Randy in the internal directory for 6 months. Nobody noticed. Not even me, because I wasn't checking. I wasn't here for attention. I was here to keep the goddamn machine running, while everyone else played PowerPoint kabuki theater. The thing is, being invisible has perks. People talk around you. Loudly. Carelessly. Like the time legal left the M and a projection slide deck open in the printer tray, complete with redline comments about post-sale asset shedding. Translation: a whole lot of us were about to get canned as soon as the ink dried on the $1.1 billion merger with Zenthra Holdings. But they forgot one thing. Actually, one person. Me. And hey, while we're here, quick pause. If you're the kind of person who loves watching silent revenge unfold in slow motion with spreadsheets, contracts, and absolute precision, hit that like button and subscribe. Seriously, 97% of you watch without subscribing, and it means the world to the team when you do. Alright, back to the carnage. I wasn't born with an MBA or a family trust. What I did have was a steel trap memory, a suspicious mind, and access to every back-end ledger, asset register, and compliance log this company ever touched. 13 years of watching people like Marcus Bexley, the COO and Chief Smirk Officer, cut corners, fudge numbers, and expense wellness retreats that somehow always lined up with his mistress's Instagram posts. I didn't say anything. I archived. I cross-referenced. I learned to listen to silence. The first time I heard the phrase founder's proxy clause, I was in the break room microwaving soup next to legal's new paralegal, Sarah. She was venting to another associate about a missing sign-off on the merger documents. Something ancient. Buried. A clause no one could find. I felt my stomach drop. Not in fear, in recognition. Because I knew exactly where it was. It was in a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Bottom file cabinet, under a stack of old payroll reports and outdated onboarding packets. Clause 7C. Founder's proxy provision. Signed by Maya Geller herself, the original CEO, before she sold her soul to capital markets and vanished to Tuscany or wherever failed visionaries go to ferment. It granted one employee discretionary authority to halt or amend any transaction over $1 billion. In the event of ethical dispute or fiduciary neglect. That employee? Me. And that was the moment the flickering light above my desk finally felt like a spotlight. First it was the Porsche. Then a matte black G-Wagon with blackout rims parked diagonally across 2 spots like it was allergic to humility. By Friday, the CFO rolled in with a Bentley that had custom plates reading "Win Big." Meanwhile, the rest of us were still fighting over who took the last K-cup. That's how the rumbling started. Not with memos or announcements, but with luxury cars multiplying in the C-suite lot like cockroaches in a vacant apartment. Then came the whispers. Closed-door meetings. Boardroom windows frosted over like they were hiding state secrets. Calendars marked O with no real travel. I watched as a champagne cart wheeled by at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, pushed by an intern who looked too confused to question anything. That's when the word started floating around. Exit. It wasn't said like an ending. It was said like a prize. Like the word itself was made of gold leaf and stock options. People said it casually like it wasn't code for layoffs, asset shredding, and forced NDAs. I kept hearing it in strange places, near the executive bathroom, in the elevator when they forgot I was standing behind them, whispered at off-site lunches where someone always picked up the tab with a Stratwell card. Rumors said a $1.1 billion acquisition was coming. A merger but with teeth. Zenthra Holdings, some hydra of a parent company that specialized in efficiencies. Meaning they buy you, gut you, and leave the shell propped up with AI dashboards and a single intern running 5 departments. I didn't panic. Panic is loud. I just kept typing, smiling, blending in, like chipped drywall. But then, one afternoon, I was refilling the paper tray on the printer near Legal's suite, and that's when I heard it. Founder's proxy clause still pending. 5 words. Mumbled by a junior attorney who clearly had no idea what she just said. My hand froze mid-load. That clause hadn't been mentioned in a decade. I was sure they buried it. Or at least hoped it would die with the dusty files and records. But there it was, floating out of some associate's mouth like it wasn't a loaded gun with a hair trigger. I didn't flinch. Didn't turn around. I just finished loading the tray and walked out calmly. Heart as steady as a metronome. But something ancient in me stirred. Something cold and deliberate. Like an old circuit flickering back to life. See, when you've been treated like background noise long enough, you start to catalog everything. You remember who's rude to waitstaff, who changes numbers after the quarter closes, who adjusts access permissions in the audit logs at 3:17 a.m. They thought the founder's clause was forgotten, lost to time. They were wrong. I knew exactly where it lived. In a gray file cabinet under a box of surplus toner, buried behind onboarding packets from when we still had physical HR. And I knew what it meant. They couldn't finalize the sale without that clause being addressed. And they sure as hell couldn't override it without the original proxy's consent. That proxy, still breathing, still typing, still here. I sat at my desk long after the office lights dimmed, the hum of the vending machine louder than any conversation I'd had that day. The cleaning crew passed me twice without a glance, like I was just another file cabinet someone forgot to cart out in the last renovation. Truth is, they weren't wrong. I'd blended in for so long, I barely remembered what it felt like to matter. But that whisper, Founder's proxy clause, had cracked something. Not a panic. A pulse. I didn't go straight home. I walked the long hallway past payroll, past the old IT closet that still smelled like burnt circuits, and unlocked the file room with a key I wasn't even supposed to have anymore. And there it was. Drawer 4B. Jammed, rusted at the top edge, like it hadn't been opened since the Obama administration. I yanked it hard enough to rattle the cabinet. Inside, under a stack of yellowing onboarding packets and an unopened pack of branded mousepads from a rebrand we never finished, was the folder. Thick, dented at the corners. Faded Stratwell and gray letterhead printed in a time before the merger talks, before the C-suite started calling us a legacy liability. I flipped it open and there it was. Clause 7C. The founder's proxy provision. Signed in black ink by Maya Geller herself. Dated 3 days before she secured Series A. I remembered that week. We were broke. She was barely holding the company together with a box of Cliff Bars and inspirational quotes. Legal counsel back then was a family friend who also ran a print shop out of his garage. That's how desperate it was. Clause 7C granted one employee, a named proxy, the authority to approve, delay, or reject any material transaction exceeding $1 billion, should Maya or her direct successor be unavailable or compromised by conflict of interest. And that proxy, me. Back then it was just a gesture. She picked me because I was the only one who knew where all the files were and didn't flinch during hard conversations. You're the failsafe, she said. You see things. You don't chase attention. If it ever gets this big, someone's gonna need to remember what we stood for. I remember laughing when she slid the paper across the table. We were eating takeout sushi on recycled napkins. I didn't even read the whole thing. I just signed it thinking, sure Maya, whatever helps you sleep. But now I held it like it was a live grenade. The ink was still crisp. The clause still valid. And according to everything I overheard from legal, no digital override or revocation had ever been filed. They'd forgotten the paper. They'd forgotten me. But the clause? It remembered. Suddenly everything shifted. I wasn't some back office ghost anymore. I was a circuit breaker wired into the very bones of the company. I slid the folder into my tote, tucked beneath a Tupperware of half-eaten pasta and the office-issued tax binder no one ever asked me to return. And as I walked out into the night air, the city humming like it always did, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel scared. I felt exact. Like a locked door had just clicked open, quiet, deliberate, irreversible. And everyone upstairs was still dancing in the hallway, unaware the foundation had just shifted beneath their designer shoes. By Thursday, the office felt like a pot left too long on high heat, whistling, boiling, 1 second from eruption. Everyone was in war room mode. Executives snapping fingers, VPs pacing like coked-up TED Talk rejects, and legal mainlining espresso like it was anesthesia. The air was thick with the smell of panic hiding behind optimism. They didn't call it a fire sale, but you could smell the smoke. Marcus Bexley, our smug-as-hell COO, became the unofficial king of the building overnight. He strutted through the halls in $800 loafers, barking half-sentences like, "Consolidate by end of day," and "Trim fat, not function." He took every opportunity to walk past my desk. Desk 9B, corner cubicle, same half-lit fluorescent overhead, and tossed me the kind of glances you reserve for rats in the pantry. "Still here," he muttered one morning, not even slowing down. "Cute." I looked up from my screen, smiled. "Still breathing." He chuckled like I was a harmless relic. And that was his mistake. Behind the scenes, I'd already started pulling threads. See, people forget who really runs an office. Not the ones with titles or parking spots, but the ones with access. I had keys, literal and digital. Shared folders they forgot I was added to back in 2016. An archived email database nobody ever scrubbed. Expense reports routed through an old finance platform I helped pilot. They upgraded the front end years ago, but the back end? Still mine. Still searchable. And oh, the things I found. Invoices for executive development retreats in Tulum. Charged to facilities. Line items for motivational architecture that turned out to be private chefs and yacht rentals. Hiring packets for temporary contractors who just happened to be friends of Marcus's nephew, getting 6-figure salaries to analyze market sentiment, while sending memes in Slack all day. No receipts. No board approval. No compliance trail. I indexed everything. Dated it. Labeled folders with names like discretionary decay and Bexley_bonuses_Q2. I didn't need to leak them yet. I just needed them in place. Organized. Precise. They thought the war room was theirs. They thought the battlefield was the boardroom. But I'd already taken it to the archive. I even flagged a few things I knew would catch the attention of the buyer's due diligence team. Marked inconsistencies in vendor payments, overlapping contracts, double-booked revenue projections. Just a few breadcrumbs. Enough to raise eyebrows. Enough to delay. Marcus had no idea I was behind the curtain, watching every twitch of his self-satisfied smirk. He was too busy gutting teams and redecorating his office like we were already bought and sold. What he didn't know. The deal couldn't move forward without me. And I didn't just have a seat at the table now, I was setting the damn plates. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't background noise. I was the one making sure the system hiccuped exactly when I wanted it to. And Marcus Bexley? He was about to find out what happens when you mistake a ghost for a fuse box. It was just after 9 a.m. on a Tuesday when the first domino fell. Legal had been camped out in conference room B for 3 days straight, surrounded by contract drafts, security badge-only binders, and a rotating cast of stressed-out junior associates pounding Red Bulls like finals week never ended. I was getting water from the crusty old cooler outside the room, listening like I always did, head tilted just slightly, pretending to scroll through a stale company-wide newsletter on my phone. Then Sarah, a paralegal barely out of law school, stuck her head into the room and said the line that shifted the entire building's atmosphere. "We're missing a signature." That phrase shouldn't have meant anything. Not to them. Not at first. But something in her tone turned the air brittle. Heads turned. You could hear the scratch of pens pausing. Then she continued, a little unsure now. Clause 7C. Proxy authority. There's no digital match in the archive. No override filed. No revocation on record. We can't finalize without it, or we stall. I stopped breathing. Just for a second. Clause 7C. She said it like it was a math problem. She didn't understand what it was, not really. But someone higher up clearly had flagged it as critical. Because suddenly the war room wasn't buzzing, it was silent. Marcus Bexley, lounging with his usual brand of entitled disinterest, let out a short laugh and rolled his eyes. "Oh, that clause? It's a myth. Some legacy garbage Maya wrote back when she was living off protein bars and good intentions. The guy's probably dead. We'll scrub it." The room chuckled nervously. Sarah didn't laugh. She just looked at the floor and said nothing. I blinked slowly, hand still resting on the water cooler tap. I felt the chill of the metal against my knuckles and realized I'd been clenching a little too tightly. That was it. That was my moment. Not some dramatic speech. Not an office-wide interruption or an announcement over the intercom. Just a simple truth settling into place. They didn't know. They still didn't know. Marcus thought the clause was about a guy. Someone long gone. Some legal ghost with no pulse and no power. And I, Reese Hall, Cubicle 9B, left off the holiday party list for 13 years, was standing 10 feet away, very much alive, very much watching. I took one step back from the cooler, adjusted the sleeve of my blazer, and ran my hand along the lapel. The fabric was stiff. Pressed. For once, not covered in lint and printer toner. I'd ironed it that morning for a reason. I didn't know exactly when the moment would come, but I knew it would. And now that it had, now that the missing piece in their billion-dollar puzzle was being spoken aloud by someone too junior to even understand it, I felt the weight shift. Not on my shoulders. On theirs. Because they were about to learn the difference between a myth and a memory. They were scrambling through archives, clawing through digitized contracts and defunct access keys, trying to find a name. And I was right there, drinking tap-temp water from a paper cone, watching them sweat. They thought the glitch in the system was a typo, a missing scan. But the glitch was me. And the system? About to reboot. She came in like a Category 5 hurricane wearing Louboutin heels. It was 3:42 p.m. on a Wednesday merger eve. Everyone was either in final prep mode or pretending to look busy while mentally checking Zillow listings in Aspen. The building buzzed with the kind of tension only billion-dollar checks and fragile egos can create. And then came her. Vivian Langston, technically the CEO's wife, spiritually the company's unelected executioner, blew through security, bypassed reception, and zeroed in on Cubicle 9B, like she had a GPS beacon strapped to her divorce settlement. She didn't knock. She didn't speak in hushed tones. She slammed her crocodile purse onto my desk so hard it knocked over my stapler and nearly shattered my mug. The one with the faded "World's Okayest Employee" label. Fire. Her. She hissed, mascara streaking down one cheek, foundation smudged like she'd face-planted into betrayal. Or I will leak everything. The photos. The calls. The yacht logs. Do you hear me? Behind her stood Thomas, my direct manager, looking like he'd just witnessed a fatal car crash and realized he was at fault. His tie was crooked. His hand trembled at his side. Mouth open but silent. "Reese," he started, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, but..." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just held up one finger. Calm. Measured. Deliberate. "Before you continue," I said, "check your inbox." He blinked. Confused. Pulled out his phone like muscle memory was the only thing still working. Swipe. Tap. Scroll. Then silence. His expression shifted in layers: confusion, realization, denial, fear. He blinked again, this time slower, like his brain had to reboot just to process what he was seeing. Clause 7C. Scanned from the original hard copy. Initialed. Signed. Timestamped with legal verification from Geller and Stern, Maya's original counsel, and still legally binding under corporate charter. And that wasn't all. Attached below it was a folder titled Contingency. Langston. He clicked. Photos. Invoices. Screen recordings of flagged financial discrepancies tied to unnamed shell accounts. Each redacted just enough to be legal, but not enough to hide intent. Wire transfers with his initials. Expense reports altered at exactly 2:17 a.m. 3 weeks before the merger talks became public. Receipts for client hospitality that lined up with Vivian's travel history and matched the date stamps on private yacht logs off the coast of Nice. His lips moved but no sound came out. Vivian leaned in, eyes narrowing. "What is this?" she spat, tone shrill, shaky. I met her gaze without blinking. Insurance, I said. That word landed harder than any HR warning or subpoena ever could. Thomas sank into the guest chair behind him like gravity had finally caught up to the situation. He didn't ask where I got it. He didn't question the timing. Because he knew. Deep down they both knew. I hadn't just stumbled into this. I'd been preparing. Every breadcrumb, every receipt, every whisper they thought had vanished into the air vents had landed in my lap, catalogued with librarian precision. They had cornered me, tried to make me the scapegoat for a scandal they cooked up in silk sheets and tax havens. But instead of folding, I slid a loaded clause across the chessboard and waited. Vivian looked like she wanted to scream but didn't know what pitch would get her out of it. Thomas looked like he wanted to die but didn't know what version of hell to choose. And me? I finally exhaled. Because the thing about being invisible for 13 years is, nobody ever sees the knife until it's buried to the hilt. Thomas's voice cracked before the words could land. Where did you get this? I stood slowly like I had all the time in the world, which I did now. I looked him in the eyes, calm as a sleeping lake. From your assistant's share drive, I said. The one she never password protected. You'd be amazed what people leave in draft folders when they think no one's watching. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. 2 years' worth, I added. And that's just from her laptop. I haven't even touched the external backups she synced to Google Drive on accident. That's when the panic really set in. He didn't shout. He didn't deny it. He just went pale. The kind of pale that makes you think of headlines and subpoenas. Vivian stood frozen, blinking fast, lips parted but silent. Her phone vibrated 3 times in her purse, and she didn't move an inch. And then, the escalation. Legal was summoned. First the internal team, nervous, hollowed out from days of round-the-clock review. Then the outside counsel from Fenwick. They came in with briefcases and Bluetooth headsets, assuming they were there to manage some last-minute closing logistics. They weren't. Then came the buyer. 3 suits from Zenthal Holdings, one with a notepad, one with an iPad, and one with eyes so cold he could have iced a martini just by looking at it. They sat across from me in conference room, like it was just another negotiation. First polite, courteous, then curious, then intrigued. By the time I finished walking them through the clause, the validation paperwork, and the scanned originals, each one marked with timestamps, notarization, and metadata, they weren't just nodding. They were smiling. Clause 7C. Confirmed. Proxy authority. Active, unrepealed, enforceable, and binding. The room shifted. The merger team stopped breathing. Thomas looked like he wanted to crawl into the ceiling tiles. Vivian had retreated to a corner, furiously typing something on her phone. Maybe to PR, maybe to her lawyer, maybe to her yoga instructor in the Maldives. I didn't care. What mattered was that the line they needed to cross, the final sign-off, the last domino, was mine. My signature. And they tried to corner me, humiliate me, erase me. Now, they couldn't move forward without me. I wasn't angry. That storm had passed. I wasn't smug either. I'd waited too long to waste this moment on gloating. I was surgical. Precise. I watched them all shift in their seats, recalculating, wondering if I'd come to destroy the deal or hijack it. Neither, I thought. That would have required me to care about their egos. No, this wasn't a power trip. It was a correction. They'd ignored the failsafe. Now the failsafe had teeth. I leaned forward, folded my hands neatly on the table, and met the buyer's gaze. You want my signature? I asked, voice even. He nodded, slow and respectful. Then we're doing this on my terms. The silence in the room was the kind you only hear when everyone's realizing they've already lost. I pulled out a slim manila folder. Nothing dramatic, no theatrics, and slid it across the table. 3 pages, neatly typed. Double-spaced. No legalese, no wiggle room. Just facts, names, and outcomes. Thomas leaned forward like he could change what was already written just by squinting at it hard enough. These are your demands? He asked, voice cracking. Not demands, I replied. Terms. First line. Marcus Bexley, terminated, effective immediately. No golden parachute. No consultancy cover story. His name scrubbed from every internal memo before end of day. I'd even drafted a press release headline if they needed help. COO departs amid strategic realignment. It sounded just vague enough to be believable and just sharp enough to sting. Second line. Retroactive bonuses for the janitorial staff, dating back 5 fiscal years. They'd worked overtime during every exec retreat and got nothing but grief when the fridge was empty. I'd watched them clean up messes from departments that made 5 times their salary and couldn't refill a paper towel dispenser. Third line mine board observer status. No vote, no speeches, just a front row seat, remote access only, to every major decision moving forward. I didn't need power. I needed proximity. Influence works better from the edges anyway. Vivian shrieked like she just stepped on a nail. "This is extortion," she barked, waving her phone like it had authority. Thomas looked like he was about to faint. "Reese, be reasonable. We can renegotiate." "We don't have to." I tilted my head slightly, no smile, just steel. "You already did. When you cornered me in a cubicle and tried to toss me out like a takeout box." The buyers? They didn't flinch. The man in the center, cold, calm, tailored within an inch of his life, smiled faintly and tapped the folder with one finger. "We prefer it this way," he said. "Less drama. More control." And just like that, it was done. Thomas signed first, hands shaking so hard he smudged his own name. Vivian slammed her pen down like she was trying to stab the desk. Marcus wasn't even there. They had to call him on speakerphone while someone from legal stood behind him and watched him digitally initial from his vacation villa in Bali. Then they turned to me. I took the pen. Signed slow. Clean. When I looked up, nobody was making eye contact. Because they knew. They all knew. For 13 years I was the one they looked past. The one they mistook for a filing cabinet, a help desk, a redundancy. The one they never invited to strategy meetings or asked for input or thanked when I fixed things they broke. But now? Now I was the clause that stopped their billion-dollar fantasy from going off the rails. I was the signature that mattered most. And I was the line that changed the ending. The limo waited out front, all black glass and desperate symbolism, an olive branch on wheels. The driver held the door, half smiling like he expected me to step into my victory lap. Inside, champagne, a folder with my new title printed in glossy serif, and a key card to the corner office on the 38th floor. My name was finally spelled right. Embossed even. I walked right past it. Didn't wave. Didn't flinch. Just dropped my badge on Thomas's desk, still warm from the sweat of signatures, and stepped into the October air like I'd just clocked out from a shift at CVS. 4 blocks later, I pushed open the greasy glass door of Marcy's diner. Chimed like it always did, cheap, familiar. One booth by the window, cracked vinyl still patched with duct tape. I slid in. The waitress, Janine, looked up from her crossword and gave me the same nod she'd been giving me every Thursday night since 2011. "The usual?" she asked, pencil behind her ear. "Make it 2 eggs instead of 3. And add the sourdough." She nodded and didn't ask why I was there in the middle of the day, in a pressed blazer, with high-end leather flats that clearly didn't belong in this zip code. I pulled the folded newspaper from my tote. The headline stared back at me like a punchline I'd been waiting to deliver for years. Anonymous proxy halts $1.1 billion deal, then resurrects it on her terms. No photo. No quote. Just a single line buried in the 3rd paragraph. An internal employee, whose identity remains undisclosed, exercised legacy veto authority under Charter Clause 7C. That was me. Legacy veto authority. Has a nice ring to it. I sipped my coffee, dark and burnt, and watched a pigeon fight a bagel on the sidewalk outside. The world didn't stop. No applause. No fanfare. Exactly how I wanted it. Janine dropped the check face down on the table. I paid in cash, tucked a 50% tip under the salt shaker, and wrote one word on the receipt before I left. Clean. They'll move on. Rebrand. Restructure. Someone will get promoted. Someone will get demoted. Marcus will spin his termination as creative realignment, and Vivian will probably leak her own story to Page 6 to beat the timeline. But none of that's mine to worry about. My part's done. I did what I came to do. I waited. I listened. I remembered. And when the time came, I moved one piece and tipped the entire board. Final voiceover, not loud, just clear like a blade sliding back into its sheath. They thought I was a footnote. Turns out I was the asterisk that rewrote the deal.